own. I want to read this little part from this book about the smallpox blankets, where this whole thing comes from. See, here's the thing about when it comes to Native American genocide, that term. It's like, all right, let's just go to Nazi Germany, where the term genocide comes from, which was adopted by Hitler from the Indian extermination policy. I mean, here's the thing. Does Indian extermination policy exist? You can look into Andrew Jackson. You can look at the U.S. Cavalry and their generals. They wrote a lot of memoirs about how to treat the Indians. The Indians also talk about them always trying to assassinate them at truce meetings, and they are known to be truce breakers. With the Indians, that's non-deniable because it's documented. Is their motive to kill someone off or smear them, make them look bad, or propagandize their culture in a way so that you can problem, reaction, solution? We got to get rid of the problem. We need the U.S. Cavalry, which that's the thing, the troops shall overcome them. You know what I'm saying? People aren't too privy to that aspect of things there, but it's like all the evidence is there. Here's another thing. If the Indians were so bad, why did Benjamin Franklin, before he wrote the Constitution, he says, we have a perfect example of a near perfect union to the north. And he's talking about the Indians and their union that they had, because different tribes would have alliances to fight the neighboring tribes. And this was a big problem of the Indians for real, is that we were all divided. Well, they weren't really related. Everyone wasn't directly related. And so therefore there's multiple waves of Indian people that you would call Native or Indian at the time. They came from different origins. Not all of them are from the same origin. So that's a misconception there, that they all came from Siberian land bridge, or they all came from Europe, or they all came from Asia. That's not the case when it comes to that, because it's like you could probably think the Mayans and the Peruvian Incan are probably more closer related to each other, but then they're separate. They're not the same, but they're more related than they would be to the nomadic tribes in North America and Canada. You know what I'm saying? But when you get into those unions and alliances, they learned from these type of groups. And that it's not because they're related, it's because they would send traders with one another, and they would also rob and spoil. It was like a big game to Indians, is to get revenge. That was another problem there, because they were so... Listen, if you're already conquered from within, how easy it to conquer a nation from without. You know what I'm saying? And that's what was going on with the Indians, pressure from above and below. And they would have French backing them over here and British backing them over here, and they would pin the Indians off against one another, but then the French and the British wouldn't really fight. You know what I'm saying? It was just a big game they played, because I guess, they understood that language there of revenge and ambush and connivery and all this stuff, and how war destabilizes people. It's in the art of war. How if you war too much, you run the risk of your society totally being destroyed and overtaken by foreigners, man. But anyway, there's motive here. You know what I'm saying? That's one thing. Is there motive behind it? And once again, this is revenge, and it's the British did it. So, I mean, this is the thing. And these people are already dead and gone, man, so there's no way to hold them accountable anyway. But like I said, listen, documentation is there. Motive is there. It's just called war crimes, man, is really what this stuff is. Nowadays, this would just be called a war crime. But it's like there's, what is it called? The Nuremberg Treaty or something like that, where you're not supposed to use these types of things. You can't use them in all-out national war, but you can use them on internal wars. That's through your corporatism, law of the sea type of legalese, doublespeak. Okay, here we go. Okay, here it goes. Look at this. This is what I'm reading from. It's this chapter. The origin and distinctive name of pillagers applied to the Leech Lake band of Ojibwas and the era of smallpox. And it says right here, look, in these footnotes or whatever, on distribution at the President Fond du Lac, they fall sick of the smallpox. Common saying against the British account of the real manner in which smallpox became introduced among them. There's a lot of bad blood with the... Listen, the British were pissed off about Fort Mishmiliac and this robbing, which these guys got their name, the pillagers, because they took all this traders' goods because on consignment, because it was like a misunderstanding, and they were kind of salty about it. They were like, we can't have an Indian uprising. You know what I'm saying? So they figured they had to do something real dirty. Okay, so, all right, here. And immediately unto the barter for which the Indians were eager. Some of his goods, having not got wet by rain, were untied by his men and exposed to the sun to dry. The temptations to almost naked Indians who had not seen a trader for a long time was too great and too easily overcome, and being on the eve of their grand festival rite, when they were accustomed to display all the finery which they are possessed, caused them to doubtfully to covet the merchandise of the sick trader. They possessed plenty of furs which they offered repeatedly to exchange, but the trader's men refused to enter into trade until their master was sufficiently recovered to oversee it. There was no reconcerted plan or even intention of pillage when the rifling of the trader's effects actually commenced. A number of young men, women, and children were standing around admiring the goods which had been exposed to dry, and for longing for possession as much as an avaricious white man for a pile of yellow gold, when forward young warrior approached a roll of cloth, and after feeling and remarked on its texture, his itching fingers tore off a piece, sufficient to make him a breech clout. And at the same time he remarked that he had beaver skin in his lodge, and when the trader got well he would pay his demands. And the trader's men stood dumb, and making no effort to prevent the young pillager from carrying off the cloth, others became bold, following his example, and tearing off pieces of calico shirts and cloth for blankets. And the goods spread out to dry soon disappeared at a very uncertain credit. And the young pillagers taking their trophies to the lodges, the excitement in the village became general as persons became determined to possess a share of the trader's remaining bales. The credit of good is now changed in an actual pillage, and an only anxiety evinced by the Indians, men, women, and children, was who would secure the greatest quantity, a keg of fire water being discovered in the course of the ransacking of the sick trader's outfit added greatly to the excitement and the lawlessness of the scene, and the men soon became unmanageable and dangerous, and the rifle trader was obliged to quickly embark in his empty canoe and leave the inhospitable camp of the Ojibwas to save his life, and it is said that he died of the sickness from which he was suffering at Sauk Rapids on his way down the Mississippi. From this circumstance, the band of Ojibwas became known amongst their fellows, who generally very much depreciated this foolish act, by the name of pillagers. And on the creek of the scene we have described was enacted, is known to this day as Pillage Creek. And at the time, the upper Mississippi band trader to the winter among them, they were obliged to meet visits each summer to La Pointe and Sault Ste. Marie and Mackinac. See that? And to procure the necessaries of which their intercourse with the whites learned them to stand in absolute need, such as clothing, arms, ammunition, and to want such as the fire water. Okay, let me see this. The conduct of the pillagers in this affair was generally censured by the more peaceful fellows as a foolish and impolitic, and would tend to prevent traders from coming amongst them for fear and meeting with the same treatment, and to make up for their misconduct, as well as to avert evil consequences that might arise. Pillagers on the ensuing spring gathered a number of packs of beaver skin and sent a delegation headed by one of their principal men to the British fort at Mackinac. and to appease the ill will of the whites by returning an ample consideration for the goods which they have pillaged. Let me see that there, okay. The British commandant of the fort received Pax of the Beaver, and he returned to share the pillages of his goodwill and friendship towards them, and strengthened his word by giving their leader a metal flag, a coat, and a bale of goods, at the same time requesting that he would not unfurl this flag nor distribute the goods until he arrived into his own country. With this injunction, the pillager chief complied till he landed at Fort du Lac, where, anxious to display the great consequence to the metal in the presence of the British, he had raised him in his own estimation. He formally called his followers to a council, and putting on his chief's coat and unfurling his flag, and united his bale goods and freely distributed it to his fellows. Shortly after, he was suddenly sick, and returning from the woods, he expired by himself, and at the discovery of his remains afterwards indicated all those who had received a portion of the goods also fell sick, one after another, and died. The sickness became general and spreading to different villages. Its fearful ravages took off a large number of the tribe, and it proved to be the smallpox. And many of the Ojibways believed, and it is common saying to this day, that the white men purposefully inflicted it on them by secret bad medicine in the bale of goods, and punishment for the pillage for the Leech Lake band had committed on one of their traders. It was a serious charge, and in order to ascertain if it was really entertained by the more enlightened and thinking portions of the tribe, I have made particular inquiries, and flatter myself that I have obtained from intelligent old Chief Pillager a truthful account of the manner in which the smallpox on this occasion was actually introduced among the Ojibways.